With the NBA trade deadline officially wrapped up, most NBA fans are in an absolute frenzy because of the trade their team did or didn't make in some cases. Between blockbuster star trades to small moves that could have a huge impact, there were many deals that went down that could potentially affect the playoff or even championship picture. Today we have to talk NBA trade deadline, in particular taking a look at the three biggest winners and losers and the impact that each trade will likely have on this team's franchise. But before we get into that, I just got a text from the NBA themselves saying that unless everyone watching hits that like and subscribe button, all the trades that happened yesterday will be voided. So if you want to save the trades and happen to enjoy the content, it would be absolutely clutch if you dropped a like and sub. But all jokes aside, let's get into the first major winner of the 2022 NBA trade deadline, the Brooklyn Nets. Oftentimes, when trading away someone like James Harden, it puts a franchise in a place of pain, because the return just doesn't make up for what they lost. But surprisingly, the Nets were able to get back a great haul for the beard. And some would even go as far as saying that the Nets won the James Harden trade. In case you've been living under a rock, the Nets were able to snag Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks in exchange for James Harden. Some will say that losing James Harden is an L in itself, but in my eyes, this Nets team was a trade deadline winner. With Ben Simmons, this team instantly gets elevated to one of the better two-way rosters in the entire league, and being that KD and Kyrie will always be taking shots down the stretch, Ben Simmons literally doesn't have to worry about shooting the ball with this team. Simmons has the ability to guard anyone on the floor, facilitate the offense, and get a bucket down low if needed, and some believe that playing the small ball center could unlock a championship caliber lineup, unlike anything we've ever seen before. On top of that, this team gets one of the best shooters in the entire league in Seth Curry, who has shown that he can be a consistent and reliable outlet shooter without being a complete liability on defense. And this team was able to get Andre Drummond. And well, even though at times he thinks he's Kyrie Irving taking the ball coast to coast, he is a big body down low and this team needs it. On top of that, this Nets team gets draft capital, which could be very beneficial after the KD era is over, which honestly makes it nearly impossible to say that this team wasn't a trade deadline winner. Oftentimes in the NBA, there is rarely a win-win trade, but as of right now, even though the 76ers gave up a lot, I believe they are one of the biggest trade deadline winners as well. This team was somehow able to pull off a Ben Simmons trade for literally the biggest star they could have gotten, which at the end of the day is all the 76ers fans could ask for. Harden hasn't been his Houston self this year, but there is a very good chance that he bounces back in this new playing environment and forms the best duo in the entire league alongside Joel Embiid. It's difficult to say how big of a win this trade is for the Sixers right now, but the fact that Harden opted into his last year of his deal gives the Sixers a decent window to try and win it all. I'm not sure the last time we have seen a guard as good as Harden and had dominant big men and Joel Embiid on the same team, so to say the 76ers team could shock everyone this year is an absolute understatement. This trade wasn't the only one that had somewhat big names though, because the Wizards were also able to make some moves that got them a big name, and potentially convince Bradley Beal to sign his extension in Washington. Sure, the Wizards basically traded away Montrezl Harrell for a bag of chips, but the other trade that this team was able to pull off makes up for it in a big way. You guessed it, I'm talking about the huge move for Mavericks big man Kristaps Porzingis. Going into the trade deadline, no one really knew what the Wizards were going to do, being that Bradley Beal underwent a season-ending wrist injury. Because of this, many believed that this team wouldn't do much, but boy were they wrong. If you didn't know, in this deal, the Wizards traded away Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis. I don't know about you, but to me, this seems like an insanely one-sided deal in favor of the Wizards. Sure, Porzingis has been injury-prone, but the man is only 25 years old at this point and has the potential to be an all-star caliber player. On top of that, it had been reported that Spencer Dinwiddie and Bradley Beal didn't get along off the court, so being that Dinwiddie would likely get traded anyway, getting someone with the status of Porzingis in return is an absolute steal. This team was also able to deal away Davis Bertans, who in my eyes is one of the worst contracts in the entire league. So yeah, I think the Wizards were big trade deadline winners. With this move, Bradley Beal could be incentivized to sign an extension, and if he does, that gets the Wizards a chance to win now, and even if Beal demands a trade, his value will be much higher if he's on a long-term contract. The team did lose Montrezl Harrell for nothing, but being that he's on an expiring deal anyways, it's not really a big deal, because they likely would have lost him in the offseason anyways. Plain and simple, the Wizards were able to get a potential star without losing their young talent, which in my books is a big win any day of the week. The Wizards, Nets, and 76ers were the biggest trade deadline winners in my opinion, but we have to give a shout out to the honorable mentions before taking a look at the biggest losers. I believe that there were 3 other teams that made out like bandits at the deadline, even though they made smaller moves. Those teams being the Indiana Pacers, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Los Angeles Clippers. To sum it up quickly for each of these teams, the Pacers were able to get a potential franchise cornerstone in Tyrese Haliburton to kickstart their rebuild. The Cavs were able to add even more young talent in Karis LeVert, only at the cost of an injured Ricky Rubio. And the Clippers, well, to put it simply, this team pulled off one of the most one-sided trades of all time by getting Norman Powell in exchange for literally nothing. No offense to Keon Johnson, but this was a huge upgrade for the Clippers. But even though there were many winners at the deadline, there were also losers, whether it's right after or sometime in the future. Obviously, we won't know if a team truly lost their trade deadline moves until sometime down the road, but as of right now, I believe there are 3 clear-cut losers from the past week. The first team being the Dallas Mavericks. Before the trade deadline, this Mavericks team was looking very legit. Luka was doing Luka things, and this team had formed one of the best defenses in the entire league, thanks to the help of Jalen Brunson and Dorian Finney-Smith. And even though the Mavericks didn't trade away any of the players I mentioned, the moves they did make just didn't make sense. As mentioned, this team traded away their second star Kristaps Porzingis in exchange for Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie. On top of that, this team was also able to snag veteran guard Goran Dragic in the buyout market after he was traded earlier that day. At first glance, this might not seem terrible to some NBA fans, but to me, this is one of the worst trades out of the entire deadline. Sure, Dinwiddie, Dragic, and Bertans are all solid players when on the right team, but the Mavericks just aren't the right team for any of these guys to be successful. This team already has plenty of guards in the rotation, and they just added 2 more. On top of that, this doesn't help the team with cap flexibility at all because all these guys are locked up on multi-year deals. To put it simply, the Mavericks moves just don't make sense, especially being that this team was heating up over the past month. The only bright spot is that this team was able to extend Dorian Finney-Smith on a very solid contract, but regarding the trades that this team made, I have to say that they are definitely losers for now at least. The Mavericks trade may have been pretty bad, but at least Mavs fans can say that their front office didn't look completely delusional with the trades they made, unlike the next loser on our list. You guys already know who I'm talking about, the Portland Trailblazers. To say that the trade deadline has been eventful, horrible, and straight up confusing is literally an understatement for this team. The Blazers first traded away Norman Powell and Robert Covington to the Clippers in exchange for pretty much nothing in return as mentioned. And then they pretty much did the same thing with CJ McCollum as well. To put this in perspective, let's just take a look at what this team actually gave up to get where they are right now. To acquire Norman Powell last year, the Blazers had to trade away Gary Trent Jr., who if you've been paying attention to is literally going off for the Toronto Raptors as we speak. And to get Robert Covington 2 years ago, this team gave up 2 first-round picks. So basically, the Blazers at this point gave up Gary Trent Jr. and 2 first-round picks for Keon Johnson and pretty much nothing else. But that's not even where it ends. As you all know, this team also traded away CJ McCollum to the New Orleans Pelicans for a package centered around Josh Hart, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and draft picks. But then this team turned around and traded Alexander Walker for an injured Joe Ingles. And the man is literally a free agent next year and said he'd go back to the Jazz. At this point, the Blazers are making it seem as though they are trying to lose this season. But maybe that's exactly what they're trying to do. I believe the Blazers actually have a master plan that could either make them contenders and allow them to keep Dame, or cause them to be a bottom seed in the league for the next decade. Being that the 2022 draft class is utterly stacked, there is a very good chance that Portland is trying to tank to get a top 5 pick. Being that literally all the players in the top 5 of this draft could be franchise players in the future. On top of that, this team literally has over $60 million in cap space for the offseason. But this is where things get tricky. At the moment, the only star players that will be free agents this offseason now that James Harden has opted into his deal are Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine. Being that Beal is eligible for a Supermax and the Wizards just traded for Porzingis, along with the fact that the Bulls are one of the best teams in the East, the odds of either of these players leaving at this point are slim to none. Due to this being the case, I believe there's a very good chance the Blazers' plan blows up in their faces, but only time will tell if that's the case. Lastly, on our list of losers at the deadline, we have a team that did not make a trade at all, and if you didn't know, I'm talking about the Los Angeles Lakers. It is no secret that this Lakers team needed to make some changes at the deadline, but between their lack of flexibility and literally no one wanting Russell Westbrook, this team wasn't able to get a deal done, and it might cost them a playoff run this year. As mentioned in previous videos, from the time that the Russell Westbrook trade happened, I thought it was a big mistake. And now, this team is in a place where they have no tradable assets, a big three that just doesn't work together, and a group of veteran players that is simply old. Let me know down below who you think the biggest winner and loser of the trade deadline was, and what team you would have liked to see make a move. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one. Woods out.